This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 9, Episode 6. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network of shows, brought to you by KSG Armory Holsters. Today is Wednesday, August 9th, 2023, as of the recording of this show. And I am your host, Riley Bowman. And today I'm joined by a special guest co-host. You've seen him before, heard from him a few times. It's been a while, and that would be Brian McLaughlin. Hello, Brian.
Hey, nice to see you again, Riley. Thanks for having me on.
Brian, for those of you that don't know, is our director of training. Also is involved in the product development for everything over at mountainmanmedical.com. Longtime listeners of the podcast should be well acquainted with the Mountain Man Medical brand. And so always a good time to have Brian on and talk shop, so to speak. And we got, I think, a fun one here today that we've titled Updates in Tourniquet Tech or Tourniquet Technology. We're going to talk about tourniquets. A lot of cool, interesting, innovative products that have been coming to market in the last little while. Many people are probably familiar with the cat tourniquet or maybe a soft tourniquet. And a few others out there, obviously, but there's some other things. And a recent news story brought, this to, it's always on our minds. We're always thinking about this kind of stuff, but there was a news story that was pretty interesting as far as a real world use of not only a commercially made tourniquet, but also initially there was an improvised tourniquet that was used. We'll talk about what that story was here in a moment. I do want to make mention that today's episode sponsors are Mountain Man Medical. And you can find Mountain Man Medical at mountainmanmedical.com. And also, another sponsor today is handgundrills.com, which I think we've mentioned once before previously, relatively newcomer to the podcast as far as sponsors go. And we're glad to have handgundrills.com on board. We'll do some actual sponsor spots here a little bit later in the episode. And hey, while we're at it, we're talking about things, you all should make sure you subscribe to the Mountain Man Medical YouTube channel, which Brian puts out some great content there. And since I mentioned it, and we haven't mentioned it in a while, you might as well, while you're doing that, head on over to the concealedcarry.com YouTube channel, which some of you are probably watching the podcast on YouTube right now. But if you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channels, please do so. One final note, Brian, we're going to see you at the Guardian Conference in September, right?
It's coming up. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. I'm going to do a hostile medicine class, how to take care of people when it's dangerous around. So, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you did a class like that at a Girl and a Gun National Conference, didn't you?
It's my bread.
Well, you were going to, and then you didn't. So we had somebody else. That's right. What am I saying?
Yeah, I was going to, and then, I didn't wind up doing it. But I also will be doing it at the Active Self-Protection Conference, the Bullets and Bible Conference. I think you're going to be at that one too, aren't you?
Yeah, planning on it. Absolutely. So look forward to that. And I guess that tells folks right there, you can, if you want to connect with Brian, especially, he's way, way cooler looking, especially, and way more interesting than I am. You can sign up for the Active Self-Protection National Conference, also called the Bibles and Bullets Conference, and also the Guardian Conference, which is like September 15th to 17th or thereabouts.
Yep.
I think the ASP one's like 2 weeks later. You can learn more about the Guardian Conference at guardianconference.com. Still tickets available. Can't promise how long that's the case. It's always possible we sell out. I don't know if we will, but we do hope to see many of you there. We're going to have a great time. I've been working on finalizing the list of classes that instructors are teaching, and it's going. There's some good ones this year for sure. Instructors, including some new instructors as well, some new faces like Eric Gelhaus, a well-respected instructor, retired cop, teaches at Gunsight. And of course other places. We've got, let's see who else is new this year. We got Don West, who's the National Trial Counsel for CCW Safe, and Sean Vincent that works with him, putting on a really fascinating legal seminar. I think people will really enjoy. A new female instructor joining the ranks this year, Carrie Dudenhofer. She's got this really cool class. I just call it the pistol sniper class. If you really want to learn how to, really shoot a pistol with hyper accuracy, that's a good one for you. Talking with her about another possible class edition. And let's see, we got Paul Sharp, who is, that dude's a beast and one of the top dudes in the industry for teaching self-defense, hand-to-hand combatives. Of course, in the years past, we had Todd Fossey involved, but Paul Sharp's coming on board this year because one of the things with Guardian Conference is we want to have some new faces each year, some kind of switch things up. So it's not the same old thing every year, year after year. So bringing in some fresh faces this year, and some of the ones that aren't back this year, you may see again in the future, just so you know. If you're like, oh man, I want to, get with, whatever, Todd or whoever that's been in the past. But look forward to, I know like Paul Sharp's bringing some really cool classes. He's got some knife defense oriented stuff. He's got one that's called Jiu-Jitsu for Self-Defense. And what I like about what he is describing these classes as is they're for anybody. So if you don't have any experience at all, you show up, learn some handy life-saving skills such as Jiu-Jitsu for self-defense in just a couple of hours. Let's get into our episode here today. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about this incident went down in New York City at Rockaway Beach. It was just a couple of days ago that, like I said, this kind of became the catalyst we're like, hey, this would be an interesting topic for the podcast.
Yeah. So I came across this story a little while ago. This happened back on the 7th. So Monday this week. So not too long ago, a 65-year-old woman was swimming on the beach. That reports kind of vary between 10 and 15 feet into the water. They say that she was out there like treading water, and then she was attacked. So apparently the water conditions were pretty murky, and they think what might have happened was the shark was swimming through the water, encountered the victim, and didn't know what she was, and gave it a little exploratory bite to see if she was edible. And apparently she was not, because the shark spit out the piece that he bit out of her. He actually bit out a chunk, spit it out. And one report that I read said it washed up on shore and they were actually able to find it.
Oh,
yeah. But apparently the shark did not like the taste of the victim. So lifeguards hop into the water, they drag her to shore, and for some reason they don't have tourniquets. But they were able to make an improvised tourniquet with the lanyard of a lifeguard buoy. So what they're talking about in the story that I read is that they used a rope from a buoy as a makeshift tourniquet. But what they're talking about is not one of those buoys that sits out there in the water, bobbing along with a light on it so a boat doesn't run into it. It's more of like the lifeguard buoys that they were using to apply that tourniquet. So some reports were saying that she was starting to have some symptoms that I would identify as potentially the beginnings of shock, or maybe some types of shock starting to set in because of the bleeding. But soon EMS was on site, and they got a soft T tourniquet applied pretty rapidly and transported her to the Jamaica hospital where she was expected to recover.
Yeah, right. Dude, I had missed that part about the chunk of, her flesh that the shark bit out, washing up on the beach. That's nuts. It's wild. There was some images I saw in one of the news stories. It kind of showed it blurred out her leg, but you could definitely tell it was a pretty significant injury. One of the articles said about 20 pounds of flesh that was removed from her leg.
20-pound chunk. The chief lifeguard, Jose Diaz, who was on site there, he saw the wound. He reported it as she had lost a lot of blood. The artery had come out, and you could see the bones and everything. It was crazy, he said. So I think something that taking into consideration there is the type of tourniquet that they used in this particular event. Now, you tend to see the soft T get used more often in sandy environments. One of the reasons for that, I've heard reports of sand clogging up the hook and loop, the adhesive on the cat tourniquets, and it not being quite so secure. So one of the more preferred tourniquets in a sandy environment tends to be your soft T tourniquets, because it doesn't utilize that hook and loop. It just uses that pull through strap method for getting it all cinched down and nice and tight. So that's something that I noticed. And it's surprising to me that these lifeguards weren't stocked already with some tourniquets. I would assume that they might have one of those on a pouch, maybe even attached to their lifeguard buoy for just such an occasion. But this was a really rare attack. According to the research that I was seeing, this is only the third attack in 114 years in this area. So it's very, very rare that anybody gets attacked in the area. So it's not one of those common things. So that might be, another reason for, their lack of tourniquets, but maybe they'll get some here in the future.
Right. Yeah, certainly we hope that they will too. Yeah, in some of the reading I was doing, it sounds like sharks in this area, they're not large sharks, and again, it's very apparent that shark bites or all-out attacks, if you will, are quite rare. I mean, you just mentioned like 3 of them in 100+ years. This was the most recent attack after like 70 years. And this is a fairly busy beach from the sound of it. So that gives you an idea that this is not something that was, expected, certainly. It's probably more of like a fluke, and that the sharks in that area tend to be a bit smaller than what you might encounter in some other probably warmer water environments, like down south Florida or California off the coast there. So, rest assured, if you're like, hey, I don't want to go in the water now in the Northeast there, you're probably okay, right? Nothing to be
Right.
too concerned about.
Well,
But the bigger lesson.
they actually closed down the beach just to be safe and all that kind of stuff. They put out drones to try to track and see where the sharks were at, but because the water was so murky, they couldn't actually tell what was beneath the water. So they just wound up closing down the whole beach. And some of the experts were saying that they felt that due to the wounding pattern, the teeth marks, that it was probably a bull shark or maybe a thresher shark that was in the area. So something that's a little bit smaller. It's not going to actually eat a human. It didn't intend to eat a human, but then it wound up doing it anyway. And I think some of the most important takeaways for this, medically would probably be one, bleeding control is absolutely essential. Having a tourniquet ready to go, a quality one that we know is going to work, is going to be essential. You don't want to be improvising on the spot unless you absolutely have no other choice. So being able to prep that ahead of time by having some medical gear, of course, is going to be essential for that. And I think you also definitely need to be paying attention to keeping your casualty warm. After losing a lot of blood like that, there's a very high risk of hypothermia setting in, especially with the cold water and everything like that. Even if they're out in the sun and it's a nice, warm, hot summer day, you still have this substantial risk of hypothermia setting in. And once you start to have a victim who is along a little bit further in years, about 65, like this victim is, you tend to see a much lower recovery chance, especially if they become hypothermic. So if we want to make sure that they have the best chance of recovering from this severe injury, we got to make sure that we're keeping them nice and warm and stabilized and watching out for hypothermia. Yeah.
Really good notes there. So as was mentioned, and you detailed it, I think, pretty well. There was the use of a couple of tourniquets here. The first one, of course, being an improvised one, as you described, the lanyard or rope from a lifeguard's buoy. And so, I mean, hey, if you don't got a tourniquet, I mean, what other choice you got? You better improvise, and you better know how to improvise well.
Right.
I know that's something you've done some content on a little bit. Why don't we just touch real quick? I mean, even though we're gonna end up spending some time talking about actual commercially available tourniquets and kind of what's out there and what's, what's considered to be, I guess, probably industry leading and probably, a recommended way to go. I mean, what are some of the other newcomers? But why don't you touch a little bit on the idea of an improvised tourniquet and what are some important considerations should you have to do this? Maybe some what to do's, but also what not to do's when it comes to improvisation.
All right. Yeah, no problem. So I've got, like you said, I've got some videos on this on my YouTube channel, so feel free to go check those out. But first and foremost, the most important thing to think about when it comes to improvising medical gear is that we never, ever want to do it unless we absolutely have to. When you're improvising gear, it's because you have no choice and things are really, really bad. If we have the opportunity to prepare ahead of time, we should absolutely be doing that. We should not be stocking our trauma kit with improvised medical gear. This is one of those things that I hear pretty often in the medical world, tactical tampons, right? The idea is that you can pack a wound with a tampon. Can you? Yeah, kind of, I suppose, maybe, but there's
maybe with like 20 of them.
a lot of them and a lot of time, maybe. And it's not going to be the best method. They actually make good wound packing material designed for that purpose, and it's a much better product. So I wouldn't go to all of the expense and the time and the effort to prepare something when there's already an excellent option out there for that. The second thing that we need to consider is that belts are not good tourniquets. A lot of times I'll hear people say, I'm not going to carry a tourniquet, I'm wearing a belt. Well, in my view, if I am a gunfighter or if I am a prepared citizen with lots of tools on my belt, like a spare magazine, a gun, a flashlight, whatever the case is, I need my belt to hold my pants up. I need to be able to move and handle any kind of threat that's coming my way. My belt is an essential piece of kit, and I'm not going to be giving that up to hand it off to a casualty when I can have other better options in play. The second thing that you need to pay attention to is, especially when it comes to a tourniquet, is that you're unlikely to get adequate occlusion of an artery unless you use a windlass of some kind. This is why windlass tourniquets are so effective, is because they get very, very tight and they're able to occlude that artery through all the tissue. When you have somebody who might be overweight or they have a lot of muscle in their thigh, they just have those big old jacked thunder thighs. There's lots of tissue in between the tourniquet and the femur. You're going to get less occlusion on that artery because there's just so much tissue in between. So you want to take that into account. If you're going to use a cat tourniquet, you might need to use 2 cat tourniquets to apply enough pressure to get that leg stabilized. Now, coming back to the improvised tourniquet, we might not get that adequate occlusion. If all I'm doing is wrapping that leg with a rope and trying to pull it tight enough, there's a good chance I'm not going to get it tight enough to get occlusion of that artery. Now, I don't want to knock it, right? Obviously, it worked in this situation, but there's better methods for handling it.
Or worked well enough in this situation for a time.
Exactly. So that's kind of the point here. So what probably happened is that they were able to slow the bleeding enough for EMS to arrive with the proper equipment to get that bleeding stopped. So that's probably what occurred. So we don't want to have to do that unless we absolutely have no choice. And if we've got the time ahead of time.
Looks like we lost you there for a second. Could you go back for just a moment and kind of repeat what you said?
Yeah, what was I saying? Oh, God.
Something about, I don't know. we were just talking about, how it worked well enough for a time.
Right. Yeah. So it worked well enough for a time to slow the bleeding enough for EMS to show up with the proper equipment to actually stop the bleeding. So we never want to prepare for a situation. If we have the time to prepare for a situation, we want to get that medical gear staged ahead of time because it's going to be much faster, much more efficient, and probably save the life more quickly. The other problem that you tend to have is that if you're trying to make a proper tourniquet with the items that you have around you, what's your casualty doing while you're trying to find all those items? Bleeding to death, right?
Yep.
So this is a time issue. So if we don't have a choice, we just have to make it work, then we don't have a choice. We got to make it work. But we don't want to do that unless we absolutely have to. Getting some medical gear and get it staged ahead of time is going to solve that problem for you.
Yeah, but and people I think overlook the potential effectiveness as well and simplicity of just applying direct pressure as well, which may work as well, if not better, than what some of these improvised tourniquets would do, right?
Excellent point. Excellent point. Yes, absolutely. Direct pressure, if you have no other materials, direct pressure is going to be your best bet. The only time that you should start to try to improvise a tourniquet is if one, you've got somebody to have help, they're holding direct pressure on the wound, and then you can go around and find all the stuff that you need to make that tourniquet. Or two, you have so many casualties that you have no choice and you can't hold direct pressure on enough wounds. You're
Yeah.
just going to have to make a tourniquet and hope it's going to work. So excellent point. Absolutely. Direct pressure. If you have no other medical gear, you have no other choice, direct pressure will save somebody's life the best way.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it was interesting from one of these articles, like you mentioned, that it stated from the local fire chief, I think it was, where he stated that like her artery literally came out of her leg. I'm not necessarily advising this, but I guess an option could be that you could actually get a hold of that artery and close it off.
Pinch it.
Yeah.
All you got to do is, if you can see, it's because I assume what happened was a shredding motion as those
Yep.
teeth shredded that tissue and exposed that artery, ripped part of it free. And if you, absolutely, if you see it, it's kind of gross, and you gotta, you gotta kind of put on your big boy pants, but you reach over there and you pinch that. That's an
Yeah.
excellent way of controlling that bleeding. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like the direct method.
Yeah, that's as direct as it gets, right?
Yeah, so pretty crazy stuff here. It took me a minute here. I was trying to pull up the images. So just to show a couple, what we're talking about. Those of you that are watching live with us. So got an image here of the first responders working on this lady on the beach. So it's hard to tell exactly what stage we're at here. If they were still using the improvised tourniquet or what. But also on this image, wait, I selected the wrong thing here. We'll get back to, here we go. It'll be this one. You'll see actually where she's like laying on a gurney or whatnot, and it's blurring out the actual wound itself, but you can definitely see how severe it is. And this orange thing you see going across her legs actually a restraint, a seat belt of sorts that is used on a gurney to keep the patient in place. But just above the wound on our leg, you see this other orange strap. There's some also like orange clothing or towels or whatever, but there's an orange strap and a little hint of the actual tourniquet there, the windlass, and it's going through this like buckle shaped thing, this triangular shaped buckle, which is indicative of like a soft tourniquet, SOF tourniquet. So just thought I'd share some of those images with those of you that may be curious. And the other thing I noted here, Brian, is we see just how high up this wound was and how high and tight, quite literally, this tourniquet had to be applied, and that can sometimes be problematic if you can't get the tourniquet high enough.
Absolutely. If you can't get it up high enough, then you have to go to essentially direct pressure on that junction and maybe junctional packing the wound if possible.
Yeah.
But that would be a pretty bad situation for sure. I know some shark bite victims, they tend to be on a surfboard doing paddling, and then they'll get bit and they'll have a chunk taken out of their side too. There's nothing you can do for that. Tourniquets aren't going to help that. No amount of chest seals is going to fix that situation. So sometimes you just can't save people.
Yeah. Yep. But fortunately, this woman seems to be doing okay. She was initially in pretty bad shape, critical condition, but I understand that she has been upgraded to serious condition in the hospital, recovering, expected to recover. I'm sure she's got a lot, to get through, and likely a number of surgeries, I would guess, as is often the case with such significant wounding like what this one appears to be. So let's shift gears, though. I mean, now we've talked about this incident, I think, enough and kind of broken it down, and as far as how this went down, and what was used and some things we can learn because of that. But let's now talk, Brian, about the actual, current tourniquets that we are seeing commercially, especially commercially available tourniquets. You mentioned, as we noted, that the first responders didn't seem, at least, lifeguards on the beach and maybe some of the initial law enforcement response didn't seem to have some commercially available tourniquets. But they worked with what they had, and eventually EMTs were able to arrive and get a proper one applied, and which we're thankful. Great lesson learned that hopefully some of these organizations involved, whether it's the lifeguards, whoever oversees them, of course, law enforcement, which I think in this case the responding agency was NYPD. We're seeing more and more LEOs carrying tourniquets right on their person in a pouch, sometimes attached even to the front of their holster, or sometimes just on their belt somewhere. But for those that really want to know, I mean, I think a lot of people are figuring out that, hey, I should have a cat tourniquet or maybe a soft tourniquet. But there's actually a lot of options on the market now. Not all are created equal, but let's talk about that now. What is some of the latest technology we're seeing?
Well, most of the time, like I already said, in the sandy environments, the soft tourniquet is pretty well respected. So there's a lot of people who really like that tourniquet because it works so well and it has such a great track record. I've used it on people before and I've seen it work as well. And then you don't have the problem with the hook and loop becoming all gummed up with the additional sand. The other styles of tourniquets that I've seen, there's one that I found called the OMNA, OMNA. It is a ratchet style tourniquet that's designed to be used. It's attached essentially to the cuff of a surfboard lanyard. So that you can, if you do get bit, that you can take that off and apply it one-handed and take care of any bleeding that you might have. So those are the primary ones that I think would be the most beneficial, or the ones to kind of pay attention to. Make sure though that you're getting, if you are going to get a cat tourniquet and use that as your favorite tourniquet, then you might want to check out or make sure that you're getting them from a reputable source. A lot of times, if you get them from Amazon, they'll be fake from China, and they will not function for you very well. They're actually seeing those get shipped over to the Ukraine, and it's getting people killed over in the conflict right now because they're coming out of China and they're made with subpar materials. So pay attention to that.
Right. And I put up on the screen here for those viewing the aquatic marine tourniquet, or the OMNA, as you mentioned, OMNA marine tourniquet, which I had never heard of until before today. Which really the design of this looks an awful lot like the RMT, or the ratcheting. What is it? The ratcheting medical tourniquet, I think, is what RMT stands for.
Yeah,
or something to that effect. And what's interesting about this, and maybe you could touch on this a little bit for us, since this is specific to the marine environment, meaning a saltwater environment, and of course this is where the shark attack occurred, was in a saltwater environment. What's your understanding about the effectiveness and durability of tourniquets in a saltwater or marine environment? I know you touched a little bit on the potential for things like sand to create some challenges for things like the hook and loop that's used in some tourniquets, especially like the popular cat tourniquet, which again is why you mentioned the soft tourniquet seems to be a good choice a lot of times for those types of environments. But this one, I noticed in reading the description, says it's the first and only marine tourniquet designed for in-water application and marine environment durability. So your thoughts on that?
I expect that to be a bit of a marketing ploy. I've never heard of there being an issue with any of the current tourniquets being in salt water. I know the cat tourniquet doesn't have any metal parts at all. and the soft T has aluminum grade quality materials that it uses for its windlass. So
Mm.
I've never heard of it becoming an issue. So I suspect that's more of just a marketing thing. It's the only one designed for it specifically, I suppose. Now, reading the specs of it, you can see that it's supposed to be withstand the caustic environments of the salt water a little better. But as far as I've never encountered any issues with the soft T or the cat having any issues in salt water.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why we brought you on, as you're a recognized expert in this stuff.
I hear all the rumors.
um, that's something that I hadn't even considered until, until this incident, right? So it makes you kind of wonder about these kinds of things.
Well, all of this is a big deal. Having a trauma kit, if you have a boat and you enjoy water sports of any kind, it's important to have a trauma kit. I know there is Dan Hudnett, who is a special operations medic with D-Day. He is an avid spear fisherman. So he lives down in Florida. He goes out with just fins and a spear gun and shoots fish in the water all day. And I was talking to him about it, and he's like, I've always got a knife on me, and I always have a tourniquet, because essentially we're out there shooting fish. We're chumming the water for sharks. So
Yep.
there's a good chance we might get hit by a shark. I want to have a tourniquet on me. And I asked which one he uses, and I believe he has the soft T on his kit, if I remember right. And then I had one of my Marines, when I was in the military, one of his in-laws fell off the back of a boat. His son fell into the water. He jumped into the water to save his son, and the propeller blades chewed his leg apart, and he almost died. And yeah, so it happens all the time.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. That, I mean, and like even Jay here viewing right now live with us on Facebook, posted a moment ago about how this is a prime reason why he never swims in the ocean. But not just talking about like shark attacks or shark bites, but there's a lot of different ways that people can get injured severely participating in aquatic activities. Like you just said, it could be the prop of a boat, could be actually, I've heard of people accidentally getting impaled by their own fishing spear, and that could potentially sever an artery or something on a limb or something. It could be, I mean, sometimes people have gotten severe cuts on things like reefs and other underwater biolife or bio. What's the word I'm looking for? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of different possibilities that could happen. It might be that you're wakeboarding or something else, and you just never know. Things can happen. So really good advice to have a trauma kit with you on the boat, to have a tourniquet with you on the boat or on your person. It's not hard to do, and there's a lot of options. Again, now coming back to some of the, we're seeing more and more products. Let me just, I thought I would just throw at you here. We've got, I've actually got pulled up here right now um, the current, as far as I know, the latest and greatest. What's the word I'm looking for? Committee on TCCC, or the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care, which, I mean, there's really not any one organization that say certifies tourniquets or approves tourniquets or that kind of thing, and that's not even what the Council on TCCC does, but they do have what they call their recommended tourniquets or recommended devices and adjuncts list. And so I've got that pulled up here. And just to review it with folks, everyone's familiar or should be familiar with the CAT tourniquet, the combat application tourniquet. The Gen 7 is most recent, which is what is recommended. They still list the Gen 6, but they say it's ultimately replaced by the Gen 7. You got the ratcheting medical tourniquet, the RMT, which I mentioned a moment ago, which looks very similar in design to that aquatic marine tourniquet. You've got the SAM extremity tourniquet, which is also known as the SAM XT. You got the soft tourniquet. I noticed they've changed the name of that tourniquet. We've called it the soft T or soft T wide for years now, and I've noticed on TACMed's website they just are calling it the SOF tourniquet, that soft tourniquet now, and that one's on this list, of course. Then you got the tactical mechanical tourniquet, which is a TMT tourniquet, and then the TX2 and TX3 tourniquets, which are both made by the same company, and I think the only difference is the width of them. And those are currently what's on the Committee on TCCC recommended list. But there's a bunch of others in recent history that I've been seeing come to market and or making waves. What's your thoughts there, and what's some of the stuff that you've seen?
So primarily, there are a lot of ones that have good potential, but primarily you don't see any that have the track record that the soft or the cat tourniquet has. It's kind of hard to beat those. They already work really well. So any new designs on that tourniquet, they haven't been significant enough for me to want to make the jump. So one of the main benefits of the cat tourniquet and the soft is just the exorbitant amount of data that says that it works. And any of these new tourniquets that are coming to the market have none of that data because they haven't been used nearly as many times. So are they proven? No. Do I want to trust my life to something that isn't been very well proven? Not really, unless I have to. So that tends to be where I stand on it, is that are there great options out there that are totally worth it and might work perfectly as like everything else? Yes. Am I willing to kind of risk it? No, not really personally. The only one that I can kind of say that might be worth the look is going to be that Snake Staff Systems, that very small EDC windlass style tourniquet that just came out. That doesn't have the track record, but according to the developers of that, they've been working very closely with North American Rescue to develop that tourniquet. So it's coming based on their expertise as well. So that helps to kind of stabilize that product a little bit for that. So that tends to be my theory and philosophy when it comes to tourniquets and selection.
Yeah. And that one, you're right. The Snake Staff one, I've been seeing quite a bit of. It's been, I see quite a bit of social media posting about it because it's been, I think, well, it's number one, it's kind of the new and latest and greatest hotness. And so people, I think, kind of get excited about it, and they're getting excited about it too because it's a pretty small footprint compared to some of these other tourniquets, including those that are on the TCCC recommended list. But you're spot on, and this has been my thought. I've been seeing some pretty reputable people, sort of speaking so highly of like some of these newer ones, especially like the Snake Staff one. It's like, okay, I understand that we can look at the product and probably have a pretty good sense of, just based on design, whether it's going to be effective or not. We can look at how it's constructed and probably make some pretty good assumptions. We can look at even some early testing data, meaning where people actually, whether it's done on some kind of testing dummy or whether it's actually done on a live person, and you're using something like sonogram to measure the flow of blood through the limb after the tourniquet, before and after the tourniquet's been applied, and we can make some pretty strong assumptions. But until it's really been thoroughly tested, and frankly, the only legitimate organization that does that kind of level of testing and vetting of these types of products being the Council on TCCC, until they kind of sign off on something, I'm definitely going to hold out some reservation for such newer type products. I do think we're probably relatively close to an update on the Council on TCCC recommended list, as for a while there it looked like they were doing updates close to yearly in some cases, at the very least about every other year, and in the current list, at least most recent one that I'm seeing is as of December of 2021, and here we are in 2023. So, and I suspect that they are well aware of some of these newer products, including the snake staff one, and are very likely looking at and evaluating these newer tourniquets. And so we'll
Right.
see if an updated list comes out at some point here in the.
Well, I mean, TCCC, the committee for TCCC is notoriously does not come out very often with new lists. Like that was the first time in 2021. That was the first time they had said anything in like 10 or 15 years, I think, or something like that. And it's actually quite the topic of contention among all of these tourniquet companies, because most people don't give your tourniquet a chance unless it's been approved by the TCCC committee. And you're not going to get those big, beefy government contracts that all of these tourniquet companies really, really want. So talking to a lot of the people who produce these newer tourniquets, they're very upset that their tourniquets aren't being considered or haven't been approved by the TCCC committee, because most people use that as the basis for whether or not these tourniquets are worth anything or not.
Mhm. I did find some evidence I found on a website where it had actually listed their list, the TCCC committee's list, where there were updates in 2019 and also in 20, I think 18 or 2017. So I think in more recent history, they've been updating a little more frequently than probably what they did for, some time there, probably the bulk of GWA, I would guess. And for in case folks don't understand, like I think it's fair that people place a lot of weight on the recommendation of this committee because it is made up of and comprised of a number of very experienced and um, recognized experts in the field of trauma medicine, because many of them are combat veterans that have worked in combat hospitals, and actually seeing these kinds of things used or tested. And I don't, if you don't have any other organization, I don't know where else you look. And definitely, I'm with you in as far as being in the other frame of mind that I don't want to use life-saving gear unless I'm certainly not an expert on it. And so it's like I need to be told by trusted authority that no, this has been tested, this will work, this is acceptable for life-saving use. I mean, is that only fair?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's my opinion. Like I can't do the testing on it. I've used these products in real time and I know that they work and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it kind of comes down to materials. If their production process is not up to snuff, even if I test this tourniquet and it works perfectly well, maybe I get a lemon because their productivity or their production what do they call it? The quality assurance isn't up to snuff, then I'm dead too. Even if they do use good quality materials, maybe they don't have a good production method or whatever the case is. So I'd rather not risk it, especially if I'm applying this to one of my kids or my wife. Nah, I'm just going to go for the thing that I know is going to work for sure. And I'm just going to use that.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, it is super important that people buy life-saving gear, especially in the case of like these tourniquets, from vetted and trusted sources. I would not advise people to look for tourniquets on Amazon, as it is very difficult to uh, ascertain the authenticity of products on there. I've even seen evidence of products sold where it's very apparent that the counterfeiter is using images of the real thing, and then what people are actually receiving is the non-real thing, and so very, very misleading practices. I think probably some of those stores have been shut down, but I think probably new ones just pop up, and you see this evidence even right in their own listings and the reviews on some of those listings, where it's like you see the product image, you're like, oh, that looks like a genuine Cat 7, and in fact they're using the actual images from North American Rescue. And then you look in the reviews and look at the reviews with images, and that's where you're like, oh yeah, this is clearly this is fraudulent. So I mean, obviously, mountainmanmedical.com would be a trusted resource for buying tourniquets and other life-saving medical trauma medicine type gear. Uh, I mean, tell us about a little bit about where is Mountain Man Medical's products sourced from, and why is that important?
So yeah, we're a reputable source. Some heads would roll around here if that were not the case. I'd have to kill some people. No, I think there's a certain place in hell reserved for people like that. Like, I cannot imagine the amount of anger and rage that I would feel if I was applying this tourniquet to someone that I loved and cared about, and see this thing crumble in my hands and watch that person bleed to death because somebody there is lying about the real medical gear. That is just unbelievable to me that somebody can do that and still sleep at night.
Yeah.
So yeah, the primary way is just to make sure that you're buying from people who you know is reputable. One of the primary, I've got a YouTube video about this, of course, on my YouTube channel. It's actually the one that's done the best out of any of my videos. It's also one of the cringiest because it was my first YouTube video back in the day. But in that video, I document and show you how to identify a counterfeit, a fake cat tourniquet. Now, I don't know of any fakes on the soft T or any other reputable tourniquet out there on the market. As far as I know, they're only going after cats. So maybe because they're easy to rip off. But there are some key ways to identify whether or not your cat tourniquet is a legit one. Now, make sure, even if you got your kit from a reputable company, there are some companies out there who are stocking their trauma kits with fake cat tourniquets. I don't think that they're doing it maliciously. I think that they just don't understand the problem or the issue. They just don't have enough expertise to fill these kits with the proper stuff. So if you do have a trauma kit, I suggest that you go in and take a look at that and double check to make sure that it's a legitimate cat tourniquet from North American Rescue, because it might not be.
Yeah. 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 And as was mentioned, with respect to like Mountain Man Medical being, and Frank, and actually this is perfect because I'm a little bit late in doing a sponsor message for the episode here. But Mountain Man Medical is sponsor of today's episode. Makes sense because you're here with us, especially. But Mountain Man Medical has direct accounts with all the major players. So North American Rescue, the manufacturer of the cat tourniquet, TAC Med Solutions, the manufacturer of the soft T tourniquet. I mentioned North American Rescue, TAC Med. Let's see, Combat Medical, Safeguard Medical, and a number of these other companies that, I mean, we don't deal through third parties. We don't go through suspect, sources for the materials that we buy that go into our kits. So I think it's important that people know that some of those companies were difficult to get set up with for direct dealer buying for us to put together for our products and our kits. But we stayed diligent on that kind of stuff. I know you were diligent on making some of those connections so that we could have these opportunities to buy directly from the sources for these products. So just know that if you're buying from mountainmanmedical.com, you are buying legitimate, authentic, quality products that are known to be the right ones to use for life-saving gear. So that is super, super important to us. It's super important to Brian, who heads up that effort. So mountainmanmedical.com, again, sponsor of today's episode. That's the place to go if you're looking at buying some kits, or you can buy products a la carte as well. If you're looking to resupply or restock a kit, maybe you bought a kit from another source and it generally looks pretty acceptable, but you want to add some things to it or replace some counterfeit items, you can buy the real things from us. Also, today's episode is sponsored by handgundrills.com. Just going to get this one out of the way. Handgundrills.com. I know it probably seems a little inconsistent with the topic of today's information or today's episode, but this is primarily a concealed carry and shooting focused podcast, and we just happen to have the opportunity to talk about some of these medical related things here today. And so, if you're looking for a great one-stop kind of shop for a comprehensive list of handgun shooting drills because you care enough to practice, to train, to make yourself better as a shooter. Head on over to handgundrills.com. Steve and team over there has done a great job to build up a fabulous website with amazing resources to make that easier to find the drills in one place, and also to get the targets to be used with those drills. So appreciate your support of our sponsors, which includes handgundrills.com and, as we mentioned, mountainmedical.com. So, Brian, as we're kind of coming down here closer to the end of the podcast, what are some, I don't know, is there anything else that you're like, hey, we gotta get this off my chest kind of thing, or other things that we need to hit on relevant to this topic today?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, like, medical skills are not difficult. They let people like me do it. You can do it too. Don't forget direct pressure. That's probably going to do the best benefit for you. If you don't have a trauma kit, direct pressure, that's going to save a lot of lives. Come out to Mountain Medical, get you a good trauma kit. Check out our emergency trauma response course. It's totally free, and it'll teach you about tourniquets and wound packing and chest seals and everything else you need to know about how to use all the stuff in your trauma kit.
Speaking of the emergency trauma response free course on mountainmedical.com, we learned something interesting somewhat recently. We were talking about this last week, actually, as we were looking back through the history of all those that have taken that course, and noticed some trends, meaning noticed quite a few people from government agencies, and in some cases like whole departments of certain agencies, that were taking this course. And that was, I mean, I was part of the production on that. You're obviously the main guy, teaching that content in that course, but I was a bit taken aback and humbled to see the number of, I mean, besides the whole number of people receiving this free training, but also the number of law enforcement and federal and state and county and other government agencies relying upon that course to train their people as well. So, wow, I mean, I almost got kind of chills thinking about it.
That feels pretty good. It's the first course I've ever done. I should redo it because, I could add extra things and make it a little bit better. But I've got a lot of comments from like doctors and other paramedics and other combat medics saying that it was a good course and they liked how it was done. And it is cool to have some of those departments, tell us that they're using our course to train their people. And I love to see that because, a lot of times these small departments don't have the budget to really go out and get that training. And online training is never going to be as good as in-person training, right? It just won't be, but it's better than nothing. And that feels good to see, you've got gunslingers out there using my stuff. And that feels pretty good. But I would say the coolest report that I've ever got was that a scoutmaster said that he was teaching, he had his Boy Scouts go through my course to teach them bleeding control to get their merit badge. And I thought that was super cool. I think that's the coolest thing I saw. Yeah.
Yeah. This free video training course right on mountainmedical.com. If you haven't done it, you should just go ahead and, get done with this podcast and head on over there and get signed up and just go through it, and just take you a couple of hours. And then, because it's so readily available, and you could just do that in the comfort of your home or office or wherever you are, and at your own pace. A good next step would probably be what? Go find a free, because they often are, or at least very low cost, Stop the Bleed course, which you can find and get signed up for at stopthebleed.org. You could go get signed up for, and they're not usually free. Sometimes you find some opportunities here and there, but they're still relatively low cost. You could go get signed up for a CPR, AED first aid course, perhaps. You could check out organizations like American Heart Association, Red Cross, and a few others out there that put classes like that on. And that's an actual certification. With Stop the Bleed is maybe not necessarily a certification, but it is a hands-on training course. Typically, I think they have virtual ones now too of that even. But But the like American Heart Association CPR AED first aid courses, those are very much hands-on, and that's a great next step. And above that, you could go and seek out some additional, more advanced courses. There's some great training events where you get this opportunity. We've seen some. I mean, obviously, there's the Guardian Conference where you're teaching, Brian, or the Active Self-Protection National Conference, or earlier this year. Again, you couldn't make it, but we did have a great team filling in and doing that on our behalf, representing our organization at the Girl and the Gun National Conference. Hope to see you there next year. And even like events like Mickey Shook's or Carrie Trainer's S12 event that he puts on once or twice a year, where you actually get TCCC certification going through that course that's put on there at that event, and you've been to that one as well, and been involved in teaching some of that too. So there's kind of, I guess, maybe some relatively simple roadmaps in kind of order, I suppose, of free and low cost being our virtual course, to Stop the Bleed, to CPR first aid, to above and beyond that even.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you wanted to go and become an EMT, that's definitely a little more of a time thing, but it's something you'll use for the rest of your life. And they also have first responder courses where it's essentially like a more in-depth, better training type of medical stuff so that you can handle an emergency more efficiently. And of course, come over to the Mountain Man Medical YouTube channel. That's my primary topic, is how do we handle emergencies more efficiently? I think that's one of the most important things for any medical problem. It's an emergency. And how do we keep ourselves nice and calm and make the greatest benefit for the greatest number of lives?
Amen to that, brother. Well, that's excellent. Any final words for you before we sign off?
I think that's it. Come over and see me at on YouTube, Mountain Man Medical. We're on Instagram and all of the TikToks and Facebooks. So come check us out. Give us a follow. Give us a like. Come out to a class.
Sounds good, man. It's a great place to, I think, wrap it up. And so one more reminder of our episode sponsors, mountainmanmedical.com and handgundrills.com. And this has been yet another episode of the Concealed Carry Podcast. Thank you to every one of you that's been with us, whether live or if you're listening to or watching us after the fact. Thank you for being a part of our family, our Concealed Carry Podcast family, and for supporting us and doing this now for supporting our sponsors. So that's a wrap. Until next time, folks, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.